Thank you very much for coming along. Um, like I said, tonight we're going to be talking about hormones and nutrition, but specifically around endometriosis. Next month, I'm doing a talk on PCOS. So we'll be talking about endometriosis today, and then in the future about PCOS. And I'll also be doing talks on perimenopause, as well as the nervous system and immune system as we get towards winter. So do keep an eye on my socials for other free talks coming up. So just a little bit about myself. That's me, obviously a pre-COVID photo there. I need to update those. So I am registered with BANT, and I work with people essentially to kind of help them understand, the main drivers behind their symptoms and how they can support them through dietary interventions. So alongside dietary work, I do a lot of functional testing, which can be really useful. And I'm actually going to talk a little bit about different types of testing that I would use and do use in my clinical work with endometriosis throughout this talk. And I also do some supplement work too. Now, because everyone's individual, I'm probably not going to be giving so many individual supplement advice tonight, but I will be talking sort of broadly about that, and definitely very specifically about dietary interventions and supplements. And also I'm going to cover testing, not supplements, and also going to cover off a few areas around sort of pain management, which can be helpful with endometriosis, as well as sort of if you're taking the pill, nutrients we know are associated with being depleted by the pill that you may want to look into supplementing there. So a little bit about myself. I became interested in nutrition, firstly as sort of a hobby, I suppose, but somewhat reluctantly. I had developed a pain and fatigue condition called fibromyalgia, and having exhausted all the sort of standard ways of managing pain and fatigue, I thought I'll just try and change my diet and I'll see if it makes a difference. And I'm very fortunate to say that for me it did. I've been out of symptoms for many years now, longer than I had the symptoms for, which is really great. And I'm very grateful to be in that position. So I work a lot with chronic pain because of that, and chronic fatigue. I also have stage 4 endometriosis and PCOS, and those I manage with diet and lifestyle. So they're areas that I'm really passionate about working with, and helping others in a similar situation to myself sort of understand how they can actually make a positive influence on their body and how they feel on a day-to-day with how they eat. So I try to have a really balanced approach with the emphasis on food that you are eating, and not so much about what you're not eating, and food being bad food and good food, and just, really trying to be quite gentle and essentially quite holistic. And what holistic means is thinking about your body as one big system instead of individual systems, because nothing works in isolation. So we're going to go through that this evening, about how other parts of the body actually affect and impact your hormonal balances. So things like the liver and digestion, and how that's actually involved and has a strong hand in how your body metabolizes your hormones, which is important for everyone, but especially those with something like endometriosis. So a little bit of background about my endometriosis. I have a very, very strong family and sort of genetic component for me, for my case. So actually every female in my family has pretty much endometriosis or PCOS, and I am fortunate to have both. So I've just lucked out on that one. So I used to, when I started my cycle, would have really, really horrendous periods, to the point where I would often not be able to go into school, and I would be sick with pain, like physically sick, and just completely debilitated by having a period. So I had tried pretty much every type of contraceptive out there, aside from injections, because of course at that point I wasn't diagnosed with endometriosis, but I had tried lots of different combinations of pills, and nothing really worked, and actually nothing really helped regulate my cycle anyway. So I have sort of cycled through a lot of different hormonal interventions with that. But because I got into nutrition at quite a young age, and was doing a lot to sort of manage the fibromyalgia side of things, I sort of ended up supporting my hormones quite a bit. And all considering how advanced my endometriosis was, my periods actually were, I would get through them without needing ibuprofen or paracetamol, and sort of quite well managed. For me, where I had the biggest issues was around fertility. So I had a miscarriage and then difficulties with becoming pregnant. And I started to get a little bit of pelvic pain and had gone to see a GP about it, and was told that it would either get worse and I'd be in the hospital, or it would just probably get better. And it did get worse, and I ended up in the hospital and ended up in surgery. So at that point, I actually had said to myself, look, you know what you're dealing with here. You know, it sounds like this is endometriosis. You need to go and get this formally diagnosed, and then, make next steps off the back of that. So I had booked in to see a gynecologist, and then literally the day before that appointment, I ended up in the hospital with really severe pain, and I had a endometrioma, which is a type of cyst that you get within endometriosis. So I then had an emergency surgery, and that's when they said, okay, it is definitely endometriosis and it's stage 4. I then, a few months later, had an excision surgery, which is different from ablation for those who don't know. So with endometriosis, there's 2 types of operations. So one is ablation, which is almost like a laser. So it's sort of like, if you think about grass, it's like cutting the grass. So it doesn't get the root of it, but it takes off the surface. And then there's excision, which is when you actually cut sort of into the root. And that's what I had. So for me, in my sort of areas that were affected, the bowel was impacted, and there was just a lot of sort of things were sort of buried in endometrial tissue. So a lot of my fertility concerns kind of made sense because there was nowhere for anything to implant, essentially, or to grow successfully. So that's been my sort of history with endometriosis, and I am very fortunate to have regular periods and to manage things like my pain and my hormones well. I do like to spot check with myself with my lab testing to sort of see, am I being a good guinea pig, I suppose, and making sure that I'm sort of, the interventions I'm doing on myself are effective there. So that's kind of my story with endometriosis. And a lot of what we talk about tonight are things that I practice myself in my day-to-day life. So because I have this chronic condition, along with PCOS, I'm really aware that it can't be a diet, because the diet, any kind of diet, it just doesn't, it can't last forever. It needs to be more like a lifestyle, and there has to be elements of flexibility and being able to prioritize and just sort of being gentle with yourself in that respect. So we'll definitely talk about that this evening. As I said, I also have PCOS to just add into the mix there. Okay, so tonight we're going to be talking about what endometriosis is, just very briefly, and then we're going to go through an overview of some of the hormones, a little bit deeper into just estrogen and progesterone, but actually different types of estrogens, hormones in the rest of the body. So that's what we're going to talk about: the liver and your thyroid, your adrenal glands, your gut, and then we'll talk about the pill and things that are called endocrine or hormone disruptors. We're going to talk about testing, and then we'll finish off with some diet, lifestyle, and pain support. And then, as I said, if we have time for questions, I will happily answer those at the end of the talk. So what is endometriosis? Essentially, it's the presence of endometrial tissue abnormally planted in locations other than the uterine cavity. So it's tissue that has grown in places it shouldn't be. And it affects approximately 10 to 15% of menstruating people between 24 and 40 years old. Now, I think this is a good sort of stopping point to acknowledge that endometriosis is difficult to diagnose. It's not something that is generally, you might get a working diagnosis from a GP, but usually these stats go off of official diagnosis, and those don't normally come until someone has had surgery, which is obviously a really invasive way to get that confirmed. So it may well be that this number is higher, and we're not seeing that in official numbers, but that's sort of the number at the moment. So it's a fairly high number, I would say, of people. And considering this can, normally with endometriosis, you have maybe 1 week where you feel good when things are not sort of under control, that's a pretty significant amount of people feeling good for only 1/4 of the year. So anything that we can do, if there's even one thing tonight that can help you, I would be so happy to hear it. So please let me know if you try anything and you feel a benefit. So just a brief overview of hormones. Now, hopefully this won't feel too much like a biology class, and I apologize if it does. The reason I like to go through this in my talks is that I feel, well, for myself, that I wasn't really able to make changes to my diet consistently until I understood how those things were affecting my body in a positive way. And understanding the biology at a basic level is the first step to that. So instead of me just saying, okay, everyone, eat salmon, I'll see you later, we need to know why. Why is salmon omega-3 fatty acids? What does that mean? And what's that doing? And how does that impact gut health and liver health, instead of talking about it in that respect? So it feels more like something that you are doing in a positive way for your body, instead of something that you have to do, and I have to eat healthy, and it's a chore. It is a really positive thing, but we need to understand why we're doing that in order for it to feel positive. So we talk about estrogen. I'm doing it myself as if it's just one sort of thing. Now, estrogen is made up of lots of different metabolites, and they all have different personalities. So estradiol, this is sometimes called E2. If you've had your estrogen tested at the GP surgery, this is probably what they looked at. And it's the most active form of your estrogen metabolites. And then you have estrol, which is the weakest form, but it's very high in pregnancy. You have estrone. And then you have something called aromatase, which is an enzyme that converts testosterone into estrogen. So this is really interesting. And I see this kind of case quite often with people who have PCOS and endometriosis, and they're making a lot of testosterone, too much, and then their body's then also taking that and turning it into even more estrogen, and it just kind of gets into this big sort of build up of these hormones, and that can be really useful to understand what your testosterone levels look like within the estrogen profile, even if you don't have PCOS, actually, just sort of looking at that. And normally when I work with endometriosis, I will say, let's look at these sort of estrogen, progesterone, but let's look at testosterone as well, and the this protein called sex hormone binding globulin that controls, or sort of for the large part manages, testosterone production. So we can kind of see how it's all sort of piecing together. Aromatization is upregulated or increased by things like inflammatory foods, stress, and alcohol. Just something to be aware of. So conversion. So basically all roads lead to the liver with your hormones. And there's a pathway, and it's called phase 2. So in the liver, you have phase 1. And in phase 1, things come in and they have to get almost like unwrapped for your body to process them. So a hormone might come through, or a toxin, like a pesticide, something that you ate or something you breathed in, and it needs to get unpackaged so the body can actually deal with it. So in that process, it becomes more toxic, and then it goes into phase 2, where it becomes safer and water soluble, and it goes through phase 2 in these different pathways it can kind of go down. So some of the key pathways is methylation, which again we can look at with testing, glucuronidation, and sulfation. So these are really important pathways for lots of different things, but we're talking tonight about hormones. So within sulfation, there's some foods which you can eat that support sulfation. If you think about eggs, they have that kind of sulfury smell. So that's supportive of sulfation. Methylation produces a protective estrogen metabolite that appears to be protective, and we're going to go through that in a little bit more detail, but methylation is very much involved in that, and your B vitamins are hugely involved in this. And what's really interesting about this point is that if you take the pill has been shown to deplete some of the B vitamins which you need to detox your hormones well. So it's really important, if you're taking the pill, that you're doing like an audit almost on your supplements, or checking with someone like myself. It doesn't need to be me, but someone like me, to sort of put together a supplement plan for you, to look at your medications and say, okay, well, do we need any supplements in here? Just while I'm on it, actually, I just want to say, because I didn't say earlier, I'm really not an anti-medication person at all. I did at some point, like I said, I had tried lots of different pills to sort of try and manage my hormones. And I think, you know, you have to do what you have to do to get to be able to work and to socialize and stuff like that. So I'm really not anti-pill at all. It's just more about, you know, if that's what that person needs at that time. And if you can get to a point where you feel like things are under control and you don't need medication, amazing. But, you know, sometimes it's about working alongside the medication there as well. So we'll talk about that later on. And then another pathway is called glucodegeneration. And this excretes the estrogen through bile. So interestingly, if any of you have had your gallbladders removed, sometimes we can start to see hormonal stuff going on. And the gallbladder is involved in bile production. So you excrete the estrogen via bile to the small intestine. And if there's not a great gut bacteria balance, then the metabolites essentially get reabsorbed back through circulation. So it keeps going around and around. So the gut's really important actually with endometriosis support. And we're going to talk about the gut later on. So this is just a brief sort of an image about what I'm talking about everything working together and really nothing working in isolation. You have your overall hormonal health, and all these things that tie into that are things like your thyroid, your adrenals, your gallbladder, like I said, bile, your digestion and your gut microbiome, your blood sugar, adrenals cover stress and sleep and, you know, traumas and all these kind of things. There's so much involved in your hormones. So this is why sometimes if maybe you have endometriosis and you are taking the pill or you're getting the injections, but you still are actually experiencing symptoms. And it's because sometimes these other parts of the body need help. And it's not enough to just only be taking things on the hormonal side, because maybe there's other stuff going on that needs some support. This is a very quick and very simplified version of what's going on with your hormones. So this little graph here, so these signify days of the cycle, and then this is the hormone level. Purple is progesterone and pink is estrogen. Again, estrogen's being kind of lumped in, so we just imagine all these estrogen metabolites all adding up. And this is what should be happening on a normal month for someone whose hormones are doing exactly what they should be doing. This is a lot of up and down, okay? So we can really feel a lot of up and down here. You know, in the lead up to ovulating, you get this big surge of estrogen and you start to feel really good and you have energy levels and you're feeling more focused. Usually pain feels quite good at this point. Maybe you're sleeping quite well. You're producing more serotonin. We feel really good. And then you ovulate and it just dips right down. And it's sort of like, what happened to me? Like 1 minute I felt good. And then 2 days later, I feel awful. And a huge big part of that is from this big drop that you get in estrogen. Now, often we talk about, or I see anyway, with endometriosis, people making the assumption that people have really high levels of estrogen and there's too much estrogen going on. And actually, I often see with endometriosis that the estrogen is maybe low, but the split is not right. And they're making more reactive estrogens. But again, we will talk about that in a little bit. But my point here is that, you know, these are going up and down so much, and as with your progesterone as well. And I would actually say this chart is sort of showing them in a very gentle way. It's a little bit more severe than this. And that can really pull how you feel up and down with your energy levels and your focus, affects things like your digestion, your sleep, your mood tolerance and stress tolerance. All these different things are impacted by your hormones. So progesterone's involved in GABA and dopamine production, which help you feel calm and focused and rewarded. And then estrogen turns into serotonin. Estrogen is involved with serotonin production, and serotonin turns into melatonin, which is your sleep hormone. But serotonin is a pain antagonist and is also what keeps you feeling happy. So, you know, it's a big up and down that we go through here. And then if you layer on top of that, that within endometriosis, there's often imbalances within this, then, I mean, it's no wonder that so many of us just feel like at the mercy of our hormones, basically. So this is a big sort of thing to understand. And I think that often, well, what people report to me is that they feel quite validated by seeing this. And often when we do hormone testing and we can look at it and see like, well, look, your estrogen is very low or it's very high. And, you know, or we see that the cortisol levels are really low. It's sort of like validating because it's seeing that it's not a you thing, that you need to be in bed here and you have no energy and you have no motivation, you're not lazy. There's, the body has extra needs at that point, and understanding that can be so empowering, because then you can meet that need and see that, okay, well, I know where I am at the moment. I'm going to be, my period is coming, so my dopamine is going to be lower, and my GABA is going to be lower, and my serotonin. So what can I do? Can I eat? What supplements can I take to support these areas so that I can manage my cycle a little bit more? So going to go into some individual sections now. So your thyroid is a little butterfly-shaped gland at the front here, and it's involved in your energy production, your weight management, so your metabolism. It has a hand in digestion, in skin and hair. And with endometriosis, it's very common that I see issues with the thyroid, so usually on the slower side. And sometimes we see autoimmune issues with the thyroid, which is called Hashimoto's. And there's a link that's been shown a few times through in studies there about that relationship. So the thyroid, your sex hormones, and your adrenals have a very tight sort of relationship, and what happens in one area has a hand in the other. So always worth thinking about the thyroid there. And I think also emphasizes the point that if you feel constantly tired, for example, or maybe you're gaining weight and you're having dry skin and dry hair, or your mood is quite low, and sometimes if you have that label on you of endometriosis, because there's so many symptoms associated with it, then sometimes what happens is we just kind of get lumped in with those symptoms. And it can be that, like, yes, endometriosis is involved in those, but there's maybe something else going on with the thyroid, and taking a step back and sort of understanding that you are not endometriosis, you are you as an individual, and you might have other things going on in your body as well. I use myself as an example. When I had was really struggling with fibromyalgia symptoms, I was at the doctor for I can't remember, a checkup or something, and I said, oh, well, I'm here, I've got this like rash on my ribs, can you just have a quick look? I don't know what it is, but and then he looked at it and he said, you have shingles. And because I was so used to just having chronic pain, I didn't even register shingles as something different. I just lumped it in my head with the fibromyalgia. And if any of you have had shingles before, it's extremely painful. So, I hadn't even made that differentiation there. So I think it's really important to just follow things through. And again, someone like myself can help you, but if not, just keep advocating for yourself there in those areas across your health. So this is your adrenals. So within your nervous system, you have this system called a HPA axis, and it stands for hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal. So essentially you have stress coming in, and that can be chronic stress or acute stress. And then that tells your adrenal glands to start pumping out cortisol. Interestingly, if you have inflammation internally, that also tells the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, oh, something's happening, let's release some cortisol. And within endometriosis, that tissue, because your body is very smart, it knows that there shouldn't be endometrial tissue in the bowel or at the rectum or in the pouch of Douglas and all these different places. It will try to get rid of it. And one of the biggest ways that our bodies mount an immune response is through inflammation. You think, like, if you cut your hand when you're playing with your cat, that's my example, or if you're cutting something, you get that little bit of swelling around it, don't you? And that's inflammation. As part of that process, you can sometimes feel inflammation, can't you? If you're not feeling well, you can kind of, things feel inflamed. So this is happening on a low level with endometriosis. There's this sort of, you're starting off your day and you have more inflammation to deal with than someone who doesn't have endometriosis. And that isn't fair, definitely. And it's really a shame, but understanding that can be really helpful. So then you can say, okay, it doesn't mean there's nothing that's just, tough news, nothing I can do about it. But we can start to think about, okay, well, what foods are anti-inflammatory? What can we do to support this? So within that picture, really working on your stress response is really helpful. So thinking about, vagus nerve exercises, and I do have another free talk, which I will send out afterwards, which is all about the nervous system and nutrition and different ways to support it. So definitely check that out. But working on your stress management can be really helpful. So things like yoga, deep breathing, are you drinking caffeine? How do you feel with caffeine? When I have coffee, I call it anxiety juice. I just can't drink that stuff. It just makes me feel through the roof anxious. I cannot handle it. So I just have decaf, and that's fine for me. I get the taste, but I don't have this big stress response. Is that the case for you? Are you sleeping just decent, basic hours? Are you going to bed and waking up at the same time every night? Things like this that you can start to do on a day-to-day. They're all little changes, but they really, really add up to how you feel. Your immune system. So there's interesting stuff that's been coming through about endometriosis over the past few years. And there's a question around, is there an autoimmune component? High antibodies have been found against ovary and endometrial cells. So, is that stimulating the immune system in that respect? It would look like potentially yes. You have within the immune system, you have these two branches, Th1 and Th2. And Th2 cells, when they're elevated, we see things like asthma and eczema and rashes. And then on the autoimmune side, which are involved in viral infections, we see basically every autoimmune condition apart from lupus is Th1 dominant. And this is why there's potentially links between things like endometriosis and fibromyalgia, which also may have an autoimmune component. Hashimoto's to do with the thyroid, which has an autoimmune component, psoriasis, and these kind of autoimmune stuff. And, again, working within the immune system is really important with the endometriosis picture, because if you're thinking about your health in layers, at the top, if you're taking the pill and that helps you get to work and whatever, that's great, but it's not really doing anything about down here. So not directly. So, really thinking about the immune system in that respect. Again, some studies have shown abnormal T and B cell and interleukin-6, which is involved in that inflammatory response as well. So definitely something to think about. And it's also something I would say always work on within endometriosis with myself and with my clients, is thinking about their immune system. The gut. So this is really, really interesting point to think about. And I could talk about the gut and endometriosis on its own for an hour, but I won't do that to you tonight. But studies have shown an association between the gut microbiome, which is basically the bacteria that you have, the bugs, and endometriosis. So we've seen higher levels of pathogens. So that's something that maybe shouldn't be there, and decreased levels of sort of the good bacteria, to simplify things. And that then impacts things like serotonin production, which a lot of serotonin is actually produced in your gut. And what's interesting is that serotonin doesn't just make you feel happy and doesn't just help you sleep, but it's also a pain antagonist. So when you have low levels of serotonin, you have higher perceptions of pain. And when you have good levels of serotonin, you have lower levels, or you have a higher pain tolerance or better pain tolerance. So again, this is something that's really interesting. And I actually sometimes look at serotonin levels with people who have chronic pain, and we often see that they're quite low. So that's really interesting to think about. Again, the immune system's very much involved with the gut. It's about 70–80% of your immune system is in the gut and living there. So really something to think about. And again, sort of seeing how it is that bigger picture with your body, and it's just not about these things in isolation, because the gut, even if you just think about the gut, that's affecting your immune system. We said that there's a pathway in the liver for your hormones that involves the gut. You have something that's called the gut-liver axis, and they have a relationship, your serotonin production, let alone just letting you have bowel movements. So there's lots to think about with the gut there. So there's some stuff that are common medications that maybe have an impact on the gut. So things like codeine is associated with constipation, as I'm sure many of you here are aware of that, of being backed up with codeine. But bowel movements are really important, and I'll tell you why, but it's interesting. Again, something I see clinically so often is that people who have endometriosis have a lot of difficulties with their digestion, and it's pretty much always they're constipated. So with your hormones, so you produce your estrogen, it gets used up, does its thing, and then the body sends it up to the phase 1 of the liver, if you remember, becomes more toxic, goes into phase 2, it's neutralized, and then your body will say, okay, how are we going to get rid of this? Let's send it to the kidneys and we'll send it out via urine, or let's send it down and we'll send it out in the stool. So it actually goes into the stool and it's sitting in there and it's waiting to leave. Now, if you're not having regular bowel movements, and I like my clients to sort of be having 1 or 2 per day, then the estrogen that's in that stool, it has to come back out again, and then it goes through circulation again, and then it will sit in it a second time. It says, okay, maybe now we'll get to leave. And then it's waiting and it's saying, okay, all right, we have to go through again. Maybe 3rd time's a charm. Maybe now we get to leave, and it's waiting around. So meanwhile, you have more hormones piling up on the side that need to get metabolized. So it's like when you do a load of washing and you forget about it and you forget to hang it out on time or put it into the dryer, and then it's smelly and you're like, I have to wash this laundry again. And then you have more dirty laundry piling up on the side. So keeping the bowels moving regularly is actually a really big piece of managing endometriosis. And especially so many of us have endometriosis that affects the bowel. So as I said, for me, it was affecting the bowel. Also, I forgot to mention rectum and pouch of Douglas. So, I feel you and I've been there, but it's a really important piece as well, just that the stool is moving, softly, and there's not hard stool going on, and that things feel very comfortable so that you're not sort of then straining and having even more discomfort. So keeping the bowels moving regularly is a really big piece, again, within the hormone side of things. So your lymphatic system and circulation. So the lymphatic system essentially is like our body's like waste disposal, is not a nice way to put it, but it's a good way to think about it. So kind of going around, picking up toxins and things and, metabolizing them through your system. And implants of endometrial tissue have been found in places like the lungs and even in the nose, which is very far away from where it should be. And so that suggests that endometrial tissue maybe can travel through the lymph and through blood. So we really want to think about circulation and what we can do to support that. And, I'm going to talk about ways you can support the lymphatic system and your circulation towards the end. But it's a really interesting piece, and that's something that is more recent, that's been coming through in the last, I think 5 to 10 years, about the lymphatic system and actually how much of a role it has potentially in endometriosis. So the liver, this is taken, it's not a client of mine, it's just a sample. So you're not looking at anything you shouldn't see. But this is a sample from a hormone test that I do very commonly. It's a great test because we look at hormones throughout the whole month as opposed to just a snapshot. It's called a map, so it maps it out, but then it goes into really detail on some of the days. So estradiol, so like I said, E2, this is probably what you've had tested in the doctors before, and then you have E1 and you have E3, sorry. So you make these hormones, and once you're done with them, obviously they have to go somewhere, and we know that where they go is to the liver. So your body has 3 doors it can send it down. Now you have this one, the blue door, this is the red door, and then this is the green door. And at the end of that, they transform and they turn into 16-OH, 4-OH, or 2-OH. Now, 2-OH is protective. This is the one that we love. This is the estrogen metabolite that we really, really like. And what we not so keen on, a little bit's okay, is 4-OH and 16-OH. So these are the 2 estrogen metabolites which are associated with all the kind of negative things you think about with having a period, essentially. So, the difficult periods is potentially a link with the hormone-dependent cancers, very painful periods. All these kind of things are associated with an upregulated amount of these metabolites being created. So, this is then where you use methylation, which I spoke about earlier, to then get rid of these metabolites. And you need glutathione, which is a really big antioxidant that relies on specific nutrients. You can also take glutathione without getting too detailed into supplements. You need other supplements or other things that work with glutathione to use them the best. So I would say don't go out and just sort of start buying it, because it's not super cheap. So it's better to make sure you're doing it efficiently. Essentially. And so you do have sort of ways to manage these, but ideally what we would want to try and do is, as much as possible from a dietary point, push or encourage the body to go a little bit more down this protective pathway. And the brassicas, so this is cauliflower and broccoli and kale and Brussels sprouts, they all have something in them called DIM, and DIM encourages the body to push things down this protective pathway. And so this is something that I am like I said, I'm not too hard and fast on rules, but one rule I do have for endometriosis is you need to be having a brassica every day, one portion. So just one serving is fine, just to make sure you have that really supportive, regular intake of that very specific nutrient coming through. So these are some of the aims that I sort of think of when I'm working with endometriosis. And normally when I see people, like how I got into nutrition, I'm often the last resort, and that's fine by me because again, I understand it. So sometimes we can pick a few aims and try and work on them. And for others, it's just one that we're starting off with. So I try to work on normalizing and supporting the immune response. We're thinking about liver function support, thinking about eliminating waste. So that's digestive system, assisting transit time and intestinal microflora, thinking about the exposure to hormone disturbers, thinking about inflammation and oxidative stress, looking at the thyroid and the adrenal function. So like I said, this is a lot, and we don't start with absolutely everything. We're sort of, it's a case by case, and you will be different, each of us in this call tonight. For some, stress is a huge thing at the moment, and that takes priority and really working on that. For others, maybe they're not stressed. I don't know many who aren't stressed, but maybe you're not stressed, but you are only having a bowel movement every 2 or 3 days, and that's your focus. So, picking these things, it doesn't all have to happen at once, but, these are some of the things that I would be working towards, and that I do work towards within endometriosis. Inflammation. So I mentioned it earlier. Endometriosis tissue, endometrial tissue is pro-inflammatory. So like I said, your body knows that there's something there that it shouldn't be, and it says, okay, we need to try and let's try and get rid of this. So as we saw, we're making antibodies, we're getting inflammation mounting. Meanwhile, that's encouraging more cortisol to be produced, which then is not supportive of your hormonal balance. So we just kind of get all stuck in this big sort of, like a fire, kind of out of control is the way to think about it. So understanding sort of your unique drivers can be really, really helpful. So I very often see allergies with endometriosis, viral loads. So there could be something that is sort of like Epstein-Barr, for example, from measles or mumps, that kind of thing. Sometimes we see it with people who have gut pathogens, which has been studied and shown a correlation there. So understanding those individual differences is really, really important. And I would say it's a big game changer for me as a clinician to see where there are these unique changes or needs in people with endometriosis. So cytokines and prostaglandins are involved in that inflammatory response. So like I said, it's not all bad news. It's not, okay, there's inflammation and that's it, goodbye. We're going to talk about what we can do, which are sort of anti-inflammatory support here. So hormone disruptors, again, I don't want people to get too fixated on this, because if you look at this list, you will just think, I need to throw out everything I own, and that's not the case. Again, just be balanced with yourself, just be gentle. When one of these products runs out, you just buy another one that is a natural version of that, or it has less of these things through them. So an endocrine or hormone disruptor is given to something which has been shown to potentially impact negatively the way that hormones are metabolized in the body. So BPA, which we get sometimes, a lot of plastics now are BPA free, fortunately. Dioxins, so you get that in the fatty tissues of animals and milk. Herbicides, so soft plastics. Now cling film is an easy one to swap out, and that I would say is pretty important, because that's cling film is going directly on the food that you're eating. So again, next time that runs out, you just don't buy it. Maybe you buy something else. I really like and you only need to buy them once, and you'll have them for a very, very long time. From IKEA, I get the glass Tupperware, and they've got like a little wooden lid that's airtight. And I think I bought mine, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, and they're still going. So it's just a one-off thing, but I just waited until my Tupperware ran out, or until I needed some. Bottles, so water bottles refers to, if you look at this photo, the sort of bendier it is, usually the higher in these sort of chemicals it's going to be. So again, maybe you just invest in a nice like stainless steel water bottle, and then that's you sorted there. lead, arsenic, and mercury. So we get mercury in some fish, so tuna fish. You don't have to never eat tuna again, but maybe you just limit it to once or twice a month. And then we get a type of chemical called PFCs, and these are in non-stick pans. So with these, I normally say if you're going to be replacing stuff in the kitchen, that for me, the Tupperware, the non-stick pans, and the cling film are the priorities. So with non-stick pans, sorry, you might make a flan in your pan, but in non-stick pans, there's a lot of really great products out there. One is called, I think it's Green Kitchen or something like that. I can find out and send it out, but they don't have the non-stick and they don't have the chemicals in them. And I see them all the time in places like TK Maxx, and you can get them usually really cheap. So that's a nice one to swap out. Cow's milk, something to think about. So there's a high amount of estrogen in cow's milk versus colostrum. So it's a higher amount of estrogen than we as humans need, even in what we would find in colostrum, which is part of breast milk. So you are fully grown. You don't maybe need so much of this in your system. If you find it is too hard, you just can't be without dairy. I understand it is hard. Maybe it's something you only have when you go out for dinner a couple times a month, or maybe you try to get goat's milk and sheep's milk like feta and halloumi instead of cheddar products, that kind of thing. So just, again, being something aware of it, but being balanced as well, and not being too tough on yourself. So investigations, I've kind of been like touching on these. We're just going to talk about it in a little bit more detail. So as a baseline hormone testing, this can encompass things like very obviously the sex hormones themselves, but then thinking about the thyroid, thinking about your sex hormone binding globulin, which is a protein involved in sort of managing your hormones, thinking about testosterone, with endometriosis, not getting kind of bogged down into that thought that estrogen is the only relevant hormone. Yes, progesterone is important, and testosterone as well, and cortisol also. Stool testing, very useful. Like I said, allergy testing to understand if there's food that's coming in that's sort of mounting, the body's making an even more of an immune response, which is kind of the last thing that we need. And then heavy metals. So that's, we mentioned earlier around mercury and lead and arsenic and things like that. You get arsenic in rice, for example. So don't panic and never eat rice again. You just give it a good rinse, okay, before you have it. So understanding that can be really useful as well. And again, just because you have endometriosis doesn't mean you need to do every single one of these tests. You can, again, prioritize, and it is a case-by-case thing. So for some people, one area is going to be more significant than others. And this is not an exhaustive list. There are still even within this other areas that I might look at within endometriosis. So this is hormone testing. Like I said, it's a breakdown here of the different sort of pathways, see which reactive pathways are being upregulated, and then we start to look into methylation here, which, as I said, is a really important part of hormone metabolism. And then this is what I was talking about earlier. So you have testosterone, and then it goes down the aromatization pathway to make more E2. So this is where we can get into a bit of a fiery spot, where if you have maybe PCOS and you have high levels of testosterone, and then you also have lots of aromatization happening, lots of inflammation, lots of stress, and all these kind of things we've spoken about, and then you're just like pumping out even more estrogen. So it's really useful to have that big picture view, because you don't want to just be looking at this and thinking like, oh, okay, I just need to work on bringing down my estrogens, where actually it might be, well, maybe I need to work on reducing down the testosterone as well, because that's feeding into this, and working on aromatization. So like I said, in this area, aromatization would be around pro-inflammatory, sort of anti-inflammatory foods, working on stress management, alcohol, and caffeine. Those would be the big key ones there. And if you have PCOS, and you do need to think, and endometriosis, you need to think about your testosterone. So for me, I keep my eye on my testosterone just to make sure that that's sort of not getting a little bit out of hand. This is the Dutch cycle map I was talking about. So this is, I love doing this map because it's not just a snapshot one day in time. You actually take a sample almost every day of the month, depending on your cycle. Sometimes it is every day. And then we can see how your estrogen goes up and down throughout the month. So once it goes up, is it coming down, or is it just staying up and having a little party, and then that's, you know, problematic, or is it not going up at all and maybe not encouraging ovulation? So that's really useful to see what's going on, and it can be really encouraging to see the results, do a few months of intervention, retest, and then see that things are kind of getting into more regular rhythm. It's very, very rewarding for me, and of course for my clients as well. And then this, like I said, is where you can have like total estrogen that maybe is looking normal or below range in this case, but then looking at all the individual estrogen metabolites that make up that number at the end. So like I said, this is what gets tested at the doctor's E2, but there's all these other metabolites, and some of them are actually really significant with endometriosis, like 4-OH and 16-OH. These are the reactive ones. So that's really a really key thing to look at. And then the androgens, like I said, testosterone, DHEA, things like that. The pill. So there are some nutrient deficiencies which are associated with taking the pill. So if you do take the pill, it's worth looking into some of these. This isn't a one-to-one, so I'm not giving you specific advice here, but it's definitely something you could research, speak to your doctor about. Magnesium and zinc. So magnesium and zinc are minerals that are involved in over 200 different things in your body. Things like keeping your heart pumping, for example, but also sleep and concentration and mood and your metabolism and your energy levels. All these things are involved. And because your body has such a big priority list, so many jobs for these nutrients to do, like keeping your heart pumping and blinking and walking, it's not going to be prioritizing muscle cramps where it's saying, okay, I only have this amount of magnesium, I need this much, so I'm going to just use what I have to do the essentials, and then the other things will just have to wait. So you know, it's definitely worth thinking about magnesium there, and zinc, folic acid, and B12. These are B vitamins that you need for methylation, vitamin E, which is a big antioxidant, and selenium, which is something that your thyroid really needs for to function regularly. So selenium, if you don't have to take a supplement, if you just eat 2 Brazil nuts every day, that's it. That's your selenium that you need. Key foods. Okay, we'll get into the dietary stuff. So these are all the great things you can do. So anti-inflammatory diet. So every day trying to have some anchovies or some salmon, so oily fish, have some olive oil, have some avocado, or some walnuts. You have to have every single one of these things every day. But, you know, this could be something you use in your weekly shop, and you're sort of saying, okay, I want to have oily fish 3 times or 4 times a week if you're not taking an omega-3 supplement. So, you know, building things around that. If you don't love anchovies and sardines, I do understand. I also don't like them, but I've tried to make myself like them over the years. And what I find is really nice is if you get in your blender anchovies or sardines, put some olive oil, and you could put some like sun-dried tomatoes or some olives or some pesto, and like blend it up, and then it makes like a pate. And that's really nice and anti-inflammatory support. So in your body, you have these 2 pathways. So you have pro-inflammation and anti-inflammation. And like I said, it isn't fair, but when we wake up, we have this inflammation we need to try and manage a little bit. So bringing in lots of nice anti-inflammatory foods on a regular basis, so throughout the day, is really helpful. So you could make a smoothie that's got some walnuts and avocado and chia seeds, or some turmeric or some ginger, or a combination of those things. And then you have that, and that's a little bit at breakfast, or a little snack. I have a 4-week endometriosis meal plan, which you can save 15% on. And there's a code I'll email to you, but that has got all these kind of ingredients to just kind of show you what this looks like. But those are just a few suggestions of what you can do there. Use olive oil over your food, you know, over your salad, stuff like that. Pro-inflammatory. So again, you don't never have to eat any of these foods ever again, but it's just being aware that these foods are associated for a lot of people with this, you know, a pro-inflammatory response. So dairy and alcohol, gluten for a lot of people, red meat in particular, but animal proteins, but particularly red meat, sugar, and for some people, nightshades. So sometimes if I'm really you know, we've tried a lot of intervention, we're not really getting anywhere, or we've gotten so far and we're kind of at like a plateau, I sometimes say, well, let's try working on nightshades, because for a lot of people, they're a bit sensitive to nightshades when there is chronic pain and inflammation. I have an article just a quick read on my website about nightshades and chronic pain. It's actually about fibromyalgia, but you could apply it in here as well. For some people, nightshades can be a trigger. So with these, again, it's individual. Not everyone's going to be reactive to nightshades or even to every single nightshade. So it's worth experimenting around a little bit. Again, I have a nightshade-free meal plan if it's something you wanted to try out. If you are taking things out, I would say like nothing's forever. Just do it for a little bit. Keep a diary, see how you feel. If you feel really better for it, it will be easy to do because it will feel like it's worth it. If it doesn't really make a difference, then that's okay. Then you say, all right, I've tried that. I've ticked that off, but making sure that you're not only taking food out, that you're also bringing in anti-inflammatory stuff as well. And you're also working on your gut. So within the gut, we have prebiotic food, which feeds the bacteria, and then we have probiotic food, which has the bacteria. So leeks, onions, oats, things that are fermented, so kimchi, olives, sauerkraut, and kefir if you can tolerate it. Omega-3 fatty acids, I touched on those earlier. So these are the oily fish. If you're vegetarian, walnuts, avocado, olive oil, and flax seeds. If you are a vegetarian, I would normally suggest looking at an omega-3 supplement to make sure you're getting like a really decent amount there. Brassicas, so these are those lovely vegetables we spoke about that work down that pathway. So trying to get something in every day here. And then lean proteins. So, like I said, red meat. So thinking more like eggs and chicken and turkey, fish, beans, foods that have inositol, which is very helpful at sort of supporting your blood sugar management. Seed cycling is something you could think about as well within sort of the things that you try out. Beans, legumes, and pulses, if you can tolerate them. Sometimes when people start out with me, they maybe can't manage digesting those foods to begin with, but you can definitely try. So lifestyle and pain management. So really want to work on supporting circulation, walking, yoga, swimming, exercise that's not high intensity, essentially. Really like HIIT workouts and sprinting and really aggressive spin classes. These increase cortisol, which is not ideal for us. So we want to exercise every day, or have some movement every day, but let it be something that's calm and slow. Walking, swimming, yoga, Pilates, things like that. That's sort of more gentle on the body. Bar, I like that. It's kind of like a ballet Pilates hybrid thing. Dry brushing is very nice. Regular massage if you can manage it. I didn't put it on here, but acupuncture is very supportive for stress management, and I myself find it very helpful. Pain management, castor oil packs, which I won't get into too much detail here because we're just running a bit tight on time, but I have information on that on my website, but that can be supportive of pain outside of the period, particularly just before period starts. It can be nice and helpful. And yes, like I said, I have lots of different meal plans. So if you want to discuss working with me one-to-one, you can book in for a free discovery call, and we would sort of discuss your case and what we can maybe do. But I also have meal plans which are designed very specifically to different conditions to kind of give you almost a starting point. So within the endometriosis meal plan, it's all around anti-inflammatory foods. So all these kind of things I've spoken about, these principles are within that meal plan, and they have the weekly shopping list and all the recipes there. And you can save 15% on them in any of my meal plans with Endo 15 from coming along this evening. So as a thank you for coming along. And I would say, look at maybe the endometriosis meal plan, maybe the nightshade free one if you're interested in that. PCOS has got elements of what we've spoken about as well, but I would say start off with the endometriosis one. And then I also have a 1 week, like a PMS sort of plan to follow during that luteal phase. So yes, thank you so much for coming along. I hope you learned something.